Welcome to Excel Basics number 10. In this video, we got to talk about date and time number formatting, formulas for dates and times, functions and calculations too. Now, this is a great follow-up video on our last video when we talked all about number formatting. Now, in the last video, when I ended, I said this video was going to be about finding functions, but no, this video is a follow-up. And it is going to be one amazing video. Now, this video really should be called What is Under Date and Time Number Formatting? And the reason why is when we wipe away the date and time number formatting, we're going to be amazed what's really underneath in the cell. And then, of course, the second part is and how to make date and time formulas. Now, we're going to see all of these amazing date calculations, and then we'll create this payroll timesheet where we have to calculate hours worked from time in and time out, and then gross pay deduction and days pay. Here's all of our amazing topics. Let's go over to the first sheet, date number formatting and calculations. I'm going to click on that sheet. Now, I actually want to come up. My ribbon tabs are hidden, and I'd like to uncollapse them. One way is to go to any ribbon tab and right-click and uncheck that. Or there is a keyboard, Control F1. Control F1 is a toggle. You don't need to know that keyboard. All right, because I want to have the number group open, and we need to talk about date number formatting. Now, date number formatting. Under dates that we enter into an Excel cell, there are serial numbers, which are the number of days since December 31st, 1899. Well, let's just see an example, and then it will be clear what that means. Now, in this cell, I'm going to type the date, 10/28. And notice with dates, I'm in the US-based system, so I enter the month, / then the day. You can also do other characters like a dash will work, but I'm going to use /, then / and then the year. Now I'm going to Control Enter because I want to put that thing in the cell and keep the cell selected. Well, we can see on the surface of the spreadsheet, there's the date. I can also go up to the formula bar, and it looks like exactly the same thing. Now, this is one of the number formatting examples, sort of like percentage we saw last video, where you're not going to be able to go up to the formula bar and actually see what's in the cell. So I want to do this again, and I'm going to click in cell B5 before we type the date. I haven't added any number formatting to that cell. So now when we look up in the number group, general, of course, is what is applied in our normal style by default in all cells. But watch what happens when we actually type a date in. 10/28/2017. Now, I haven't hit Enter yet. I can see in gray up there it says General. But as soon as I enter a date, Excel is programmed to automatically add a date number formatting. Now, I want to Control Enter, and immediately we look up to the number group, and there it is. It put date number formatting in. Now, I'm looking at the surface of the spreadsheet. I'm looking up at the formula bar. They look the same, but now let's do our trick. Let's apply the general number formatting, which is our eraser. Anytime we apply general, it wipes away whatever number formatting we have applied and shows us exactly what's in the cell. So when I click general, there it is, 43,036. That means that 10/28/2017 is exactly 43,036 days since December 31st, 1899. Now, if you're counting on your fingers, that means the first date that Excel actually knows that exists is 1/1/1900. So if we're counting since December 31st, 1899, that's 1. That's 2. This day right there is 43,036. Now, why in the world did they do that? It's just pure genius that they thought this up. It's so we can do date math. Now, to illustrate date math, we're going to calculate the days past due for a particular invoice. So we need to know the invoice due date, and I'm just going to type that date here, 9/12/2017, and enter. Now, they were supposed to pay the invoice on this day, but today, and you type whatever date is today for you. I'm going to type today's date for me. But guess what? I am not going to type 10/28/2017. I'm going to use an amazing keyboard, Control semicolon. Control semicolon puts today's date in hard-coded. That's the perfect keyboard when you're entering historical transactional dates. Now, over in cell B16, Control semicolon. And there's 10/28/2017. Now I hit Enter. And now we're trying to figure out what date math is. Two different dates. This date right here is further through history. This is earlier in history. Now let's just remind ourselves. I'm going to highlight both cells, go up to Number, click the drop down, and there's our Eraser General. Those are numbers underneath. Number of days since December 31st, 1899. Well, that's a bigger number. That's a smaller number. So I can take the smaller number and subtract it from the bigger number, and I'll get the difference between the two numbers. That'll tell me exactly how many days late this invoice is. Now I'm going to Control Z because I would never wipe away the formatting. I actually want to see the dates. But in my formula, I want to look at those underlying numbers. Now remember, last video we talked about it a number of different times. Formulas don't see number formatting. So we can simply equal sign, and I'm going to up arrow to get the later date, then minus, and then up arrow to get the earlier date. And when I Control Enter, that's absolutely amazing. 46 days this invoice is late. So last video we saw for the first time, formulas never look at number formatting when they make their calculation. This was beautifully designed by the people who designed the spreadsheet. We enter the dates just as regular dates. We see them on the surface of the spreadsheet as dates, but underneath those serial numbers, that's what the formula uses. That is pretty amazing. Now here we entered a hard-coded date. We actually might not want that. We actually might want to build a spreadsheet solution with a formula. So when we open this tomorrow and the next day, it'll have whatever day it is currently automatically. Then we build our formula, and the number of days will always change every time we open our spreadsheet. All right, well, we're going to get to see an actual date function equals, and there's this great function called today. Returns the current date formatted as a date. Now I'm going to hit Tab to accept today from my dropdown. And notice the screen tip. There's open parentheses, close parentheses. It doesn't tell us to put anything in as an argument. So I simply close parentheses. This is called an argumentless function. I simply enter today, open parentheses, close parentheses, Control Enter, and that's today's date. Now, tomorrow when I open this, this will say 10/29. The next day, it'll say 10/30. So now we can create our formula. When we're trying to figure out the number of days between two dates, we take equal sign, the later date minus the earlier date. And that's our formula to calculate the number of days between two dates. Control Enter. Now, of course, we got 46 in both cases. But tomorrow, this one will say 47. This one will still say 46. Now, one of our important formulas for dates is calculate days between dates, always the later date minus the earlier date. And we saw the today function. Now I want to try something just to hammer home that dates have date, number formatting, and there's a number underneath. I actually want to type 43,036, Control Enter. Now I want to add some number formatting. Of course, I didn't add any number formatting, so it's general. But I am allowed to do the reverse. I can come up and click the drop down, and there is short date. If I click on short date, no problem. And look what happens. I'm still not allowed to see that number in the formula bar, but we know that that number is underneath. And it is very helpful when making date calculations in Excel. All right, let's go look at our next example of a date calculation. Sometimes in banking, we have short-term loans. And on our contract, there's a loan issue date. So this loan was issued on 9/2/2017. But we only borrowed the amount for 120 days. So we need to put in the days until loan due, 120, and enter. Now notice we have a date and a number. But under that date is a number. So we're totally allowed to calculate the maturity date. That means the day the loan is due. Equal sign, up arrow, I have a date. Underneath there's a serial number. Plus, up arrow, and I'm totally allowed to add a number. So when I enter, there is the maturity date. So I borrowed it on 9/2/2017. I have to pay it back on New Year's Eve. Another important formula that we use when we're dealing with dates is if we have a project start date and a project end date, and we need to include the first date, well, simply subtracting these two will not work. Up here for our invoice, almost all contracts for invoice do not include the first day. So when we do our subtraction, it's perfect. 46 does not include the first day. But for a project or any date formula where you have to include the start date, then here's the formula. It still equals, and I'm going to up arrow, that's the later date, minus up arrow twice, that's the earlier date. What do we have to do? Add 1. Anytime the start date is included, that's your formula. Enter, and I know that this project is scheduled to take 76 days. Now that's another important formula. If you scroll over here a little bit, days between dates where start date is included, later date minus earlier date plus 1. Now we want to see two other formulas which involve date functions. Here we have an invoice date, and we need to calculate the due date. Now in invoicing, there are hundreds of ways to calculate the due date. You have to read your contract. Now this contract says that the amount is due on the same day 2 months ahead. Now I can't simply add 60 days because each month has a different number of days. But in this case, I can simply use a function, equal sign, I'm going to type ED, and there's the EDate function. Returns the serial number of the date that is the indicated number of months before or after the start date. Tab, start date. I simply click on the start date, comma, and the month's argument. Now if I type 1, it gives me 11/27/2017. If I type 2, it gives me 12/27/2017. That's exactly 2 months ahead. But if I type a minus number like -2, this would give me 8/27/2017. So our goal is to jump 2 months ahead and land on the 27th. So I EDate, start date 2, Control Enter. Oh, look at that. EDate did not automatically format this. No problem. For people that don't know that dates are serial numbers, that doesn't make any sense. But for us, we know we simply go up and apply some date format. I'm going to click short date. And there it is, 12/27/2017. Now I'm going to F2 and just put a minus here, because sometimes you need to go backwards, right? So if I put a minus, there it is, 8/27/2017. One other thing, F2, if I type 4, it totally knows to jump into the next year. All right, I'm going to leave this F2 as a 2 here. Enter. All right, our next due date example, this contract says that the amount is due at the end of the month. Now, here's the invoice date, 2/3/2016. I need to jump to the end of the current month. Well, there's a great Excel date function. And since we're trying to calculate end of the month, I'm going to type equals EO for end of. And there it is, highlighted in blue, end of month. I use tab. The same two arguments as eDate, start date and number of months forwards, backwards, or in our case, we want the end of the current month, February 2016. So for months, we say 0, meaning I don't want to jump backwards or forward. Give me the current month. So I up arrow to get start date, comma, 0, close parentheses, Control Enter. Whoa, look at that. It knows leap year, 2/29. If I change this to 2015 and enter, totally knows the end of every single month. F2, of course, if we did 1, it would jump to the end of next month. And sometimes that's exactly what the invoice contract says. That would be 3/31/2015. F2, we could put a minus there if we wanted to jump backwards. I'm going to change it back to 0, though, because for this invoice, boom, we need the end of the month. I better change the date back to 16. Now, our last example for dates. Here we have a whole list of customers, their amount owed. Here's the invoice, due date, and we need to calculate number of days that that invoice is late. Well, I'm going to use the today function because I want this to automatically update when I open this tomorrow or the next day. So equals today. I see it highlighted in blue, tab. Close parentheses, Control Enter on that argumentless function. Double click and send that down. Those are all the 28th. Tomorrow they'll all be the 29th. Now I make my formula. Equal sign, and I'm going to arrow over to get the later date, minus, arrow, arrow, the earlier date. Control Enter to put that formula in the cell and keep the cell selected. I point to that little green box, the fill handle. And when I see my crosshair or angry rabbit, double click and send it down. I go to the last cell, F2. That is looking beautiful. All right, those are a lot of awesome formulas for date calculations, all dependent on the fact that we know what number formatting is and that underneath there's a serial number that represents the number of days since December 31st, 1899. Now let's go over to the sheet time, number formatting, and calcs. Now, just like date number formatting, time number formatting has a number underneath when we enter a time. Under the time number formatting is a serial number, but the serial number will be totally different than our date serial number. It will be a serial number that represents the proportion of one 24-hour day. So when you think of time serial number, think of proportion of a 24-hour day. Now let's look at an example. And just like dates, and I didn't show you this. I showed you this back in video 8. If we have a date 12/2/2017, no problem. I hit Enter. I see it's properly aligned to the right. That's the default behavior for numbers. But if we enter 12, instead of a forward slash, we accidentally type a question mark, 2/2017, enter. Of course, it's going to be aligned to the left because we did not enter it as a proper date. Excel thinks it is text, not a number. Now, the way to fix it is to replace the question mark with a forward slash. Now, let's learn about time. because time has an even more specific way that you enter it into the cell for Excel to interpret it as a number. If I want 8 a.m., you got to type the hour, colon, minutes. Now, you could type colon seconds, but we don't have any seconds right now, so I'm going to type AM. You either have to type AM or PM. When I Control Enter, I immediately see a problem. As soon as it's aligned to the left, I know that Excel thinks it's text. And the reason why is you have to enter your hour, minutes, and or seconds, then a space, then either AM or PM. Now when I Control Enter, no problem. Excel thinks it's a number, and that default alignment to the right tells us that it is. So when you're entering time, enter the hours, then a colon, minutes, and then if you want, enter colon and then seconds, then a space in AM or PM. Now, if you don't put the AM or PM, that's fine, but then it will be military time. So 1 o'clock would be 13. Now, we entered this into the cell. Look up to the formula bar. Oh, look at that. Even though we didn't enter the seconds, Excel entered seconds colon 00. Now, I immediately want to come down here and type this again. 8 colon 00 space AM, Control Enter. But this time, I'm looking up to the formula bar, and now I want to go up and use our well-known trick for determining what's really in the cell. Up in the number group, drop down, and we apply our eraser general. Now, I'm going to escape here because at this point in the class, we have used general so often, I have to teach you the keyboard for this. To apply general number formatting with a keyboard, Control-Shift-Tilde. Now, you got to look on your number pad to the left of the number 1 key on your standard keyboard is tilde or grave accent. Now, depending on what keyboard or what country you're in, that key may look different. So you may see the grave accent or the tilde. But whatever's there, it's Control-Shift, that key. So now, I'm going to click in this cell right here, and we're going to apply general. Now, right now, the drop-down for number formatting shows custom because I didn't enter the seconds. But that really is a custom time number format. As soon as we use our keyboard Control-Shift-Tilde, there is the proportion of a 24-hour day. And there we can see up in the number drop-down, general has been applied using a keyboard. What? 0.33333 is under 8 a.m.? Here's what Excel did. Anytime you enter a time, it's as if you entered 8 a.m., but Excel said, I'm always going to divide it by 24. Control-Enter. Now, actually, I meant to hit Enter because I want to do the exact same formula again. Equals, I enter 8 a.m., Excel divides it by 24, Control-Enter. Now, that's a number, right? I immediately want to do our trick to see if Excel can apply a time number format, and it actually shows up as a time. And sure enough, if I come up to the drop-down, time, there it is. 0.333 is the proportion of one 24-hour day. Proportion means whatever hour, minute, second I enter, Excel takes it and divides it by the total number of hours for a day, 24 hours. Now, I'm going to Control-1 to open up Format Cells. Time. You actually have some different options. You can do military time. You can do what we did, which was to show the hours and the minutes. And there's some other options also. Always, if we Control-1 to get to Format Cells and Number tab, this will give us many more options than our drop-down. All right, I'm going to click OK or Enter. Now, if we scroll down here, we have a table that shows us some times, how we might derive that proportion of the 24-hour days, fractions, and then the actual number equivalent. Yes, 12 a.m. is actually 0. 3:15, we could do that calculation, and we would get that decimal. That's the proportion of a 24-hour day. Now, I want to scroll down, and we get to see some time math. Hey, and just before I completely scroll down from here, Notice what Excel did. It took the time we entered and divided by 24. That means if later we want to make a calculation like total hours worked, we are going to enter our times, but Excel will divide those times by 24. So when we make calculations and we actually want total hours, since Excel divided by 24, we have to remember to multiply the decimal time by 24. Now let's see our example. Wage per hour, $21.25. Time in, we'll enter it as a time value, 8:00 space AM, enter. The person left at noon, 12:00 space PM, and enter. Now, when we go to calculate total hours worked, that is the calculation later time minus earlier time. So that means it will be similar to dates where we tried to figure out number of days between later and earlier time. But of course, there's a different serial number under these two. So I want to figure out how much time has elapsed from the start time and the end time. So you ready? Equals up arrow, that's the later time, minus up arrow, that's the earlier time. Now I'm going to hit enter. And you got to be careful with time values. For a second, it looks like we got 4 hours, but really there's a time number format applied to that cell. If we went ahead and tried to calculate gross pay based on this time answer, let's just see what happens. Equals up arrow, that's the amount of time worked, times, and I'm going to up arrow to get the wage per hour. Now, I think I can do that in my head. 4 times 21.25 is $85. When I hit enter, the employee is going to be so mad. $3.54, that's not correct at all. Here's why. When you make F2 a time calculation, remember the formula is actually acting on the underlying numbers. Escape, but there was time number format on this cell. So whenever that happens, we have to apply the general format to get back to what's actually in the cell. I'm going to use the keyboard Control-Shift-tilde. And sure enough, there's our proportion of a 24-hour day. Now, anytime we're doing payroll and we're subtracting time out and time in, to get that decimal back up to actual hours, F2, since Excel divided our times by 24, we have to multiply this by 24. Now, if I do times 24, that will not work because the math order of operation will always calculate multiplication before subtraction. So we want to make sure and put parentheses around the subtraction. This will tell Excel to calculate the subtraction before the multiplication. Now when I hit enter, the employee is much happier, $85, and there's our 4 hours. So that means a very important formula in Excel for hours worked, later time minus earlier time in parentheses times 24. Now let's look at another example. Here's your homework tracker. You started at 8 a.m. and did homework all the way to 11 a.m. Well, we can calculate the number of hours there equals, and I have to remember to put the time calculation in parentheses. So open parentheses, up arrow, that's the later time, minus up arrow, that's the earlier time, close parentheses. And since Excel divided these by 24, I need to bump it back up, times 24. When I hit enter, you studied 2.5 hours. Now we can do the next calculation. Equal sign, open parentheses, end time minus start time, close parentheses, times 24. And when I hit enter, well, I did something wrong there. Up arrow, F2. Look at that. I accidentally typed a minus sign, so I'm going to put my cursor there and backspace. enter. Now I can add the two actual hours studied. Equals, up arrow, plus, and I'm going to up arrow to get the 2.5. When I hit enter, I've added those 2 times. Now, we did a homework tracker here, but this is very common. In payroll, you have time in, time out, and then there's some lunch, so they clock out. Then they have time in, time out. Now, if you have this situation, notice that's the formula, and we had to multiply by 24. But really, that was just a decimal inside of there. Then we did a second calculation. Time minus time, that was some decimal, and we multiplied it by 24. So we could actually add these 2 decimals together first and then multiply by 24. Not only that, but because we probably don't want to do the calculation, especially for payroll, in 2 steps like that, let's see how to do it all in one formula. Now remember, our goal is to add these 2. And we could have added this calculation plus this calculation and then multiplied by 24. If that's the case, guess what? I'm going to use the sum function. And I type this one out, tab, because I see sum. Now notice, sum allows you to enter some number, comma, some other number, comma. You could enter as many different numbers as you want. But guess what? I want to add the difference between these as a decimal plus the difference between these as a decimal. So in number 1, I'm going to say later time minus earlier time. Now, that number 1 argument will calculate that as a single decimal. I'm going to type a comma. Number 2, I'm going to do the second time calculation, later time minus earlier time. And that will work. Now, if I close parentheses and enter this, and Control-Shift tilde, that's the total amount of time that you studied. But I need to bump it up to actual hours. So F2, I can simply times 24. Control-Enter, and that will work. Oh, no, it won't. Control-Shift tilde. I love that keyboard for Apply General. All right, so you studied a total of 3.75 hours. It seems like you need to study more. The more you study, the more fun you can have with Excel, of course. Now, if I click back in the cell and hit F2, that's the biggest formula that we've done in terms of we have a subtraction and then another subtraction inside a sum function, and then we multiply it by 24. So I've got to show you a great trick that will allow us to get Excel to show us exactly how it calculated this step by step. I'm going to click Escape. I'm going to make sure and select the cell with the formula. And we want to go up not to Home, but over to the Formulas tab. I'm going to click. And over here in Formula Auditing, we have this great button, Evaluate Formula. Now, your screen might not be as wide as this, so you want to look for that little f of x. And when you hover your cursor, it'll say Evaluate Formula. So I'm going to click. And what this does is it shows us the entire formula in the Evaluate Formula dialog box. And it's already highlighting the very first thing that it wants to evaluate. Now, you can click the Evaluate button here with your mouse or hit Enter. Now, watch what happens. I'm going to hit Enter. So it's looking inside the cell for the start time. Then it underlines the next cell. If I hit Enter, now it's underlined the first subtraction. Now, notice how cool this is. We get to see exactly how Excel calculates this step by step. So now when I hit Enter, it does the first subtraction. That's how much time you studied before the break. Now look at this. It's underlined, so I'm going to hit Enter. That's the start time. Enter. That's the end time. Enter, and that will do the subtraction. Now the sum function has our 2 decimals. It's totally allowed to add to get the total decimal time. So when I hit Enter, the sum got 0.15625. Now it does the multiplication. So when I hit Enter, That's the final result. So using evaluate formula is totally amazing to see that large formula and how Excel calculated it step by step. Now I'm going to click Close or Escape. That's pretty amazing. All right, let's look at our last example, and this is a common one, a payroll example. Employee, their wage, time in, time out. So hours worked. I'm going to create one calculation and copy it down. Equals, open parentheses, arrow key to get the later time, that's the time out, minus arrow key, that's time in, close parentheses, times 24. Don't forget the times 24. Control Enter. I'm going to double click and send it down. Go to the last cell, F2. That's looking good. Now, gross pay. I need to multiply wage times hours worked. But notice, we need to eventually get exactly pennies. And we've seen this a number of times already. When we have extraneous decimals like this, we are required to use round. So equals round tab. Number, that's just some formula. I'm going to take hours worked times the wage, comma. We're trying to get money, and for payroll, it's to the penny. So I put a 2 to round to the penny. Close parentheses. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Now I go to the last cell, F2. That's looking good. It got wage and hours worked. Escape. Now tax deduction. Look at this. We need gross pay times tax rate. And there it is, a decimal past the penny position. And we're multiplying these two things. So I already know I have the potential for extraneous decimals I don't want with money. So I'm going to use equals round. Now I'm going to left arrow to get gross pay as a relative cell reference times up arrow, up arrow, up arrow. I need to lock that all the way down. So I hit the F4 key. Number, that's the formula. Comma, number of digits, we're talking pennies here, so 2. Close parentheses. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell, F2. I got a relative and an absolute. It's looking good. Enter. Now the total days pay. I'm going to increase the column width just a little bit. Click in cell H44 equals the gross pay minus deduction. Both as relative cell references. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell, F2. And there we go. We have completed a lot of calculations quickly by knowing how to do our hours worked. Gross pay, we had to round because we had extraneous decimals. Deduction, same thing there. And then a simple subtraction. All right, that was a lot of fun with date and time number formatting and a bunch of different time and date calculations. We saw how to calculate a complete payroll template. We talked about the basics of time calculation when we're trying to get number of hours, later time minus earlier time times 24. Don't forget, time is really a proportion of one 24-hour day. Back over on date number format and calcs, we did a whole template for number of days late for each one of the invoices. We saw the end of the month and EDate date functions to calculate due dates. We also saw the basics for date calculations or date math, where days between dates is later date minus earlier date. And if we need to include the start date, be sure to add 1. And we started it all off by, yes, indeed, date number formatting. There are serial numbers underneath. 1/1/1900 is 1, and 10/28/2017 is 43,036. Now, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun. Now, our next Excel Basics video, we'll talk about how to search for Excel functions. All right, we'll see you next video.